these answers. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm going to start recording. And here we are for Guided Pathways webinar number 5. And this webinar is Leverage Technology, wow, Leverage Technology Wisely. And where I wanted to start, again, I think most of you have been a part of this webinar series from the beginning. So basically there's 4 design pillars to guided pathways, which are clarify the path, get students on the path, keep students on the path, and then ensure student learning on the path. And there's 4 instructional approaches in the guided pathways model. And these are described in chapter 3 of redesigning, and we are going to cover these in context today, so I won't go over those now. And again, just remembering that we in Washington State are doing this guided pathways redesign in pursuit of equity. And again, one of the terms that the state board has been using underneath the leadership of Christy Wellington Baker is equity-minded praxis. And again, I just love this. Really, in guided pathways, we're looking at our structures, we're reflecting on our structures, and we're then directing action towards our structures. And it's really to serve better the students who higher education has not served, not just 2-year colleges, not just 4-year colleges, but higher education in general has really not served the needs of historically underserved students. And so this is an opportunity for us to redesign with historically underserved students in mind. And then something from the actual guided pathways model is focusing on programs of study. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we have been focusing on in the status quo today. And then talking a little bit more, taking another look at what it means to focus on programs of study. And again, Chapter 3 is what inspired this webinar series. Basically, it outlines the academic challenges students face, and it talks about how the status quo open enrollment college has attempted to address these challenges, or not address them. And then again, it also goes over these 4 instructional approaches and provides recommendations and examples for how colleges can implement this approach to instruction. And today's webinar, as it revealed itself to me, is going to really talk about one significant challenge that students face. So today's webinar is Leverage Technology Wisely. And I think the juxtaposition of technology and wisely together, those 2 words, has made me say technology. I keep trying to combine the words. So forgive my impairment there. So the core argument of the authors in regards to technology is that technology alone cannot improve student outcomes. And really that technology has to be implemented as part of a larger curricular and pedagogical redesign. So I know that the people who are attending this webinar would never say that technology alone can improve student outcomes. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I did want us to take a slightly deeper dive into that quote. And again, you could type into the chat, you could speak if you want. What do you understand as the larger curricular and pedagogical redesign of guided pathways? And what does the phrase leverage technology wisely mean to you in that context? So there's sort of 2 parts to this question. And so I'm just going to leave that up there and give folks a chance to just reflect on that. And then go ahead and type into the chat or speak. At this point in your understanding, what does leverage technology wisely mean? So Alyssa typed into the chat, alignment. I love it, Alyssa. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's just a different way of saying what I think was on one of your previous slides, the last quote, that technology must be thoughtfully implemented. If you're not using technology for a reason that supports the learning in the course, you probably shouldn't be using it. So don't use technology just for technology's sake. It should be there to support and enhance whatever the goals of the course are. And you can't do that without aligning all of the important components in the course. So, and technology is just one of those pieces that needs to be worked into that plan.
Mm.
That's from a course level view because that's what I deal with the most. But I could see how using technology wisely past the course level and expanding to program review and creating those pathways. I could see where using the appropriate technology would be helpful to help students get on those paths and understand where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing.
I agree. And Alyssa, I'm just wondering too, there's going to be lots of opportunity for you to talk more about this. But I did want to say, I think the tool that you've created, the Washington Course Design Checklist,
Oh,
is a really
thanks.
great way to sort of have a really practical tool for faculty to do that work that you just talked about.
Thank you. Yep, trying to align the checklist with the other great work that the system is doing, and guided pathways is one of those pieces.
Right, right. Diane wrote in the chat. Diane, first of all, thank you for writing in the chat. I really appreciate it. The point about redesign that sticks with me is that courses are not seen as separate courses, but as part of a program. And therefore, how would technology help with that or present barriers? Diane, this is excellent. Yes, absolutely. And we're going to be talking about this more today. And I think I'm going to make that point, and then also the second part about where technology help with that or present barriers. I feel like the authors of redesigning sort of just stopped short of really going deeper, and so I think I'm going to be pointing to the work that Alyssa has done, and also to one of our faculty members at Spokane, to really talk about how technology could help with that, with this outline. And yeah, go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just threw the chat into the chat the link to the checklist, just in case anybody's curious what Jen and I were talking about. Lots of people haven't seen it yet, but lots of people have. But there's the link that you can go straight to if you want to take a peek at it as Jen's talking about other things.
Yay! Also, I'll probably be asking at some point if you might just talk about that at like again, like I think maybe to the end of the webinar. I think there'll be a space to talk about the course design checklist.
Sure, just let me know when.
I know, I'm very excited.
Me too.
Okay, anyone else? So, does anyone want to speak? Okay, so thank you so much for, I appreciate that pause for some reflection. And let's move on to the larger curricular and pedagogical redesign in the context of e-learning. So it's interesting that the authors call out online learning as one of the reasons why they wrote this book and created this model of guided pathways. And this quote is early in the book, essentially that one of the ways that the cafeteria model has really what they call the cafeteria model, and what I've been trying to call like maybe more the status quo in open access educational institutions, especially two-year colleges, because of the focus on course enrollments rather than program completion. A lot of community colleges have turned to fully online instruction. And again, the book is very clear about all of the benefits of providing students with flexible learning options, and very clear about, like what a boon online education is. And also what an amazing thing it is that students could get their entire AA online. And Alyssa and I think we're both baby faculty, like right at the time when online instruction was just starting. I know when I just started teaching, online instruction was new, and it was very exciting. Like just as a faculty member, I found the notion of being able to teach a full course online absolutely fascinating. And I spent hours and hours designing courses. It was so fun. So however, there are some drawbacks. And in our status quo model, because of our focus on course enrollment, it does tend to reinforce disconnectedness and isolation. And this really undermines students' academic success. Alyssa wrote in the chat, when it's done well, online learning offers a lot of benefits for students, and when it's not, it can be a barrier to student success. Alyssa, absolutely. So, whoops. So, what creates disconnectedness and isolation in the status quo college? And I really want to I really want to stress that disconnectedness and isolation due to a course-centric approach is not just happening at two-year colleges. It also happens at four-year colleges. It happens at prestigious universities. It's basically this notion that people, when you're hired to teach a class, no matter where you're hired, a lot of times you're designing, teaching, and assessing primarily at the course level. And this leads to a focus on knowledge transmission. And the reason why is because if you don't know what other people are teaching, then you can't really guarantee that the students are going to get the things that they need. And so this leads to an overemphasis on like packing courses full of content at the 100 and 200 level. And again, the coursocentrism is a very complicated thing. And I'm going to do a session at ATL where I really do where I look at the assumptions, I look at the tradition of coursocentrism, I compare and contrast what it looks like at a four-year college versus what it looks like at a two-year college. But right now, the focus on course enrollments, the way we hire, the way we do professional development, all of it reinforces this notion of my course, my students. And this focus means that a lot of students experience a mixed message curriculum. And another way to talk about this is just curricular incoherence, that if you're an apprentice or a novice learner, when you enter into an institution at the 100 level, you're not an expert learner and you're not an expert in any discipline. And ideally, on I mean, I'll speak for a moment to the academic transfer side of the house. If I am expecting that my student who takes my 100 level literature course is not an expert in literature, in reading literature, writing about literature, it changes my instruction. I'm basically apprenticing that student to my discipline. And again, ideally what happens for our students is they are apprenticed, whether that's to a field of study that's preparing them for junior level transfer status in a major, or it's preparing them, like it's a literal, like I'm apprenticing you to become a welder, by the time you finish this degree. And in certain departments and programs, the mixed message, sorry, I just lost my thing there, the curricular incoherence, depending on how small the program is, depending on how many adjunct faculty there are, depending on the end goal, how clear that is. But right now, in the general AA degree, especially on the academic transfer side, because of this focus on course-centrism, it's much more likely that students are experiencing incoherence in terms of a curriculum. And they may or may not leave the end of a 2-year AA degree feeling like they have been apprenticed to a field of study. So just to review what we mean by knowledge transmission, this means that a course focuses on facts rather than concepts, covers a large amount of content, and really emphasizes lectures, readings, and media to impart information. And I know that for me as a faculty member, when I first started teaching online, and again, this is like back in 2001, my course was very much knowledge transmission. I was sort of taking everything that I thought the students should know and putting it into an online shell. And we were using, I think, like maybe Angel back then. I'm trying to remember the LMS that we were using, but I definitely focused on facts rather than concepts. I covered a huge amount of content, and I thought that by putting like videos that it was being interactive, but it was really more about imparting information rather than facilitating learning in an online environment.
I am right there with you, Jen.
Oh, do you want to
As
talk
I
about
was
that?
learning to teach online, yeah. I mean, if I look back now and I kind of laugh, I mean, I did the best I could with what I knew at the time and for as new as the field was. But yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad it's not just me.
No, it is not just you. And I don't think, in some cases, I don't think it's changed that much for some people.
And I guess this is a really important point. I'm really glad that you said that too, that it maybe hasn't changed that much for a lot of faculty. And I think part of that is because of this course-centric model and the way that the course-centric model and the way that our status quo colleges have been conceptualized, that professional development is sort of siloed over, and professional development feels extra rather than something that would actually change how you teach.
Right? And change is so hard. Just knowing the number of hours that many of us invested in some of the courses we've created, to go back and make some of those changes is just such a daunting task sometimes.
It's super daunting.
Yeah.
It is. And I guess too, if I could just use a present day example. So my partner right now is in a fully online master's in psychology program. And the instructor's courses, I won't say what it is, the instructor's courses look like the courses I designed in 2001.
Yeah.
And and so every time they want to make one little change, they've got the information in like 10 different places. And I guess the reason I'm going over this now is because I know what a lift it would be for those instructors to go back and rebuild their courses.
Yeah. And the hard thing is getting past the point where you can see where if you invest that work now, how much easier the teaching is and how much more fun the teaching is and how much more efficient the teaching can be, with just a few revisions in a course.
So Alyssa, that is huge. That's huge. I'm really glad this is being recorded. And for those of you who might be listening right now, I recognize that it might feel like Alyssa and I are just spitballing back and forth, but really, like, I think through this dialogue, these are the challenges of these are the adaptive challenges of a guided pathways implementation.
And do feel free for everybody to chime in and raise your hand if you want to make a comment. It doesn't just have to be Jennifer and I, chatting about this. I just really feel what she's saying, so I wanted to kind of pipe in on the topic.
I love this. This is awesome. This is so good. So what I'd like to do now is, so in addition to this motivation, this faculty motivation of how much better courses could be for faculty, I think it's important to note the impact of disconnectedness and isolation on student success. And so in the book on page 94, they reference two large-scale studies they did in Virginia, and the other one just happened to be here in Washington State. So it was 57 community colleges, tens of thousands of students, hundreds of thousands of course enrollments. That's a direct quote. And what they found is that a given student is less likely to complete an online course than a face-to-face course. And students who manage to complete an online section do tend to earn lower grades in the course than they would in a face-to-face section. And this is not groundbreaking news to anyone. And we do have, for the top 16 highest enrolled courses, there is a data set. There's a Tableau data set where you can actually go in and see how are students completing the online section, the hybrid sections versus the face-to-face sections. And that's just for the top 16 highest enrolled courses. And again, that the way it's set up is a very course-centric model, but I still think it's a really useful tool um, for people's guided pathways redesigns when you're thinking about those top 16 highest enrolled courses. To just, I mean, we have data to see. I think one of the questions that I've been really hearing from faculty is, how are we going to measure our progress? You know, how are we going to know this works? And I think one way is to compare, what does course completion look like after a reorg in meta majors and program maps versus this standalone, you know, versus the course enrollment model. So another thing to note is that the equity gap widens in online courses. So again, historically underserved students and students with lower levels of academic preparation, and I added in due to opportunity gaps, have much more difficulty in online courses. And again, because there's already an equity gap in face-to-face classrooms, the performance gap widens in online courses. And again, too, like, this book was written many years ago without an equity lens. And so basically, I think this quote, the way that it's written, is really problematic. So I think maybe another way to say this is that because of opportunity gaps, systemic opportunity gaps, there are the online, those equity gaps are even more enforced. They're even wider in online courses, and it really does become an imperative and a responsibility to redesign instruction in online courses because it's just so inequitable. And I'm seeing a quote in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Alyssa. Go ahead and say your comment. What are you thinking right now?
Oh, Jen, I just put in the chat that online courses really need to be designed as online courses, not as face-to-face courses that have been moved online,
Mm,
because there's a different dynamic and it's different student engagement. And because your students aren't seeing you face-to-face, they need different things.
that is a super great point. That's what I did, was I took my face-to-face course and moved it
And
online.
so did I. That's why I'm saying I'm admitting 100% to doing this because I didn't know how to do it better. I mean, for
Yeah,
what it was and the time it was, I thought, I mean, I think I did do a good job, but could it have been better? Yes. And how do I know that? Because I've learned and grown over the years. That's, you know, what you do.
truth. Truth. And I think, you know, like so one of the things that I've been thinking about with guided pathways is that lots and lots of e-learning departments have been trying to do this work. Like, e-learning has made enormous strides in just improving online work, or the teaching, the instruction in online courses. But in some ways, it still has been sort of siloed. And again, like, this is really an opportunity to take a look as a campus at what is happening in these online courses that are expanded, that we've greatly expanded because of our focus on course enrollments. And what does it mean to think about what could happen in online courses if we were thinking about them in terms of program completion, especially with an equity lens. They did do a follow-up qualitative study, and the results suggested that students struggle because the typical online course does an even poorer job than the typical face-to-face course in supporting student motivation. And this is a super interesting focus to take around motivation. And again, I feel like some of the ways they describe student motivation are a little problematic, but we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna plunge in. So one of the statements that they say is community college students often have a low level of motivation. And they quote Norton Grubb in a 2013 study of developmental education, students being like the way that motivation or a lack thereof shows up. So arriving late to class, being unprepared, not doing the homework, and being distracted during class. And it's interesting for me, like I think the seeing that community college students have a low level of motivation feels very deficit based to me. It does not feel like a growth mindset. But again, like I think the way that they unpack and explore motivation does mean that it makes it less deficit based. And to talk about that, I want to go back to this idea that the general DTA is not motivating. And again, this is a little bit more of a critique of what happens for students in academic transfer programs. But when you give students a wide plethora of choice, that's one thing. But what giving students that wide plethora of choice means is that it makes it really hard for an institution to closely connect and coherently sequence courses towards this set of learning outcomes. So it's almost less about giving students choice or not giving them choice, and more about getting a little bit more prescriptive about what students take and the order they take it, with the clear purpose of institutional planning to deepen their learning. So basically, if the student is cobbling together a program based on like whatever, like whatever choices are available to them, it's not closely connected or coherently sequenced so that the student knows I'm getting major ready. I'm building a set of skills over the course of this program. And so as a result, a lot of times students do end up taking courses just to meet the program requirements, that kind of check the boxes mentality, rather than I'm taking this course because it's going to teach me these skills and these knowledges that are going to help me meet my long-term goals. And remembering that one of the most important predictors of success is that sense of gaining employer valued skills. And as Martin Cockcroft paraphrased it, what I'm learning now will help me later. Actually, that's not how Martin paraphrased it, but Martin's was much more eloquent. But again, and I guess the other piece too is it goes back to that idea of orchestrating as the set of courses that program puts on as being more like an orchestra presentation, or putting on oh shoot, I'm not going to be able to call to mind that Gerald Graff quote right now, but I think it's just important to consider that the general DTA doesn't motivate students, and it does encourage a checking off the box mentality, which is not motivating for students. So another thing here is that when you're in the course-centric model, a lot of times instructors feel pressured to transmit knowledge. And if students are not motivated, then, and this is from the authors, and they have a couple studies that they've cited, students do tend to retain sort of superficial level information rather than this hoped for deeper learning. And surface learning just doesn't get students excited. It doesn't motivate them. And we'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation about what does get them excited, or arguably what might get students excited. Alyssa, could you talk a little bit about, Alyssa just posted in the chat about her degree cobbled together and limited advisory engagement. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I'm sure lots of us have experienced this, but I honestly cannot remember meeting with a college advisor one time in the 5 years I spent in college. I do think I talked to like the program chair in
Mm,
my program, maybe a couple times during my senior year, but I know I took courses I didn't need.
mm,
Um, I don't know. It was tough. I part of it though is I did start at one of our community colleges,
mm,
and I was on a specific degree path there, and that actually was very thought out. I mean, it was very sequenced and you just took these classes, and I was close to being done before I moved. But I moved out of state and ended up in a 4-year college in Utah,
mm,
and that transition was really hard for me because they didn't have the degree that I needed or wanted.
mm.
So I had to see where my skills and things I already knew would fit into what they offered.
Right.
And I can't believe that I even graduated. I mean, just listening to you talk about guided pathways, I can't even believe I made it through the system,
Mm,
any system of college, because I was completely clueless. I mean,
mm.
I'm surprised I stayed on any path at all.
Alyssa, thank you so much for sharing that. And as you were sharing, Shanna, I think Shanna Friend from Highline, she wrote, I never met with an advisor either. I didn't really know what they were for. And
So true, right? Like,
yeah,
why would you go to an advisor?
why would I do that?
I know, right?
And what I think is interesting is, like my experience was at a private liberal arts college where it was very expensive. And so one of the marketing strategies of the college was to say, you will get your degree in 4 years. And I think they had a graduation level of like 98%. And it was a guided pathways model, although I would never have called it that at the time. So there was intrusive advising, there was very limited choice. You basically had to declare a major upon entry. Like, so my freshman year, I declared a major. Um, I was going to be a theology major, and then I switched. Oh, and I was pre-med, and then I switched out very quickly, but I still was able to know right away because of the immersiveness of it. I knew right away I wasn't cut out to be pre-med. So I switched over to English, and again, like it's just interesting to think about people's different experiences. So for me, I was a very unmotivated student with a very poor high school GPA, but I graduated from college with a very high major GPA. And so again, Alyssa, listening to your experience and then contrasting it with mine, wildly different.
Yeah, but where's the balance? Are you going to help us find that, Jen? Like, where's the balance where students can get what they need without having the extreme that you experienced? I mean, there has to be some moderation or a midpoint in there where there is some choice, but there is a path.
I think from what I've been hearing about the model at Spokane Falls, I've reached out to their faculty leaders to ask them for like more information about this. They have default maps, but they have architected choice built into them. So like the default maps have some choice. Like for example, for literature, there's sort of like I think if I could use the example of anthropology, let's just say that there's, instead of saying like all students will take this one lit course, there's 3 lit courses that students can choose to get their humanities credit, or there's 3 different kinds of courses to choose from your humanities credit. So you could like theoretically still have a default program map, but have choice within that program map, but not so much choice.
Okay. Forgive me because I'm going to ask you a question that is going to make us go off track, and you feel free to table it until we come back to the end because I want to make sure you get through
Yeah,
everything
sure.
you want to get through today. But my curiosity, um, when I listen to you about architecting choice and, and I'm asking about finding balance, I'm wondering if anywhere in guided pathways there are places where integrated curriculums are built in, like so
Hmm.
that you could learn about anthropology or learn about literature through an anthropology lens.
Oh
Do you
my
understand what
gosh.
I'm asking?
I do. I totally
I
do.
mean,
And
because I would like, as an interior designer originally, because that's what my degree was, if I was having to learn high level math for something for design or architecture, I would much rather learn about that through something I understood and liked rather than going to take a calculus class. Because I will tell you, I dropped out of calculus because I hated it.
right.
But if I had seen an application for calculus to what I loved to do and could have learned it within that integrated type curriculum, I would have stuck with it.
So I think what you're asking is one of the biggest potentials around guided pathways. And I guess, like depending on how people structured it, if you wanted to make your first year of the student experience highly contextualized, like really contextualizing math and English in the context of that program of study, that, with that very
Hmm.
interdisciplinary learning approach, that to me feels like one of the biggest potentials of guided pathways. And and again, too, like what you're describing feels also kind of like a learning community. And so again, like and learning communities are so exciting for faculty and they're exciting for students because of those interdisciplinary connections and the real life significance that you just discussed. And so I've been confused sometimes when it like that people haven't built their guided pathways with a more learning communities focused approach or an interdisciplinary approach like you're describing.
I mean, this is related to what you're talking about, student motivation, because
Oh,
that's exactly what I
hugely.
was describing. Was I would have been more motivated to stick with something that was difficult for me if I could have learned about it in a way that was interesting to me.
Right. It would have gotten you excited
Yeah,
about math in that context because
yeah.
it's, and again, too, I always think of it as like you already have a coat rack for interior design and you have a very deep purpose for it. Like you have an intellectual coat work, like a coat rack, like a framework. So all those coat racks of math, all the coats of math, like you have a place to hang them on.
I could have had a place to hang them on.
You could have had a place to,
I
you
could have had.
could have had a place to hang them on.
Yeah. All right,
Um,
I will let you go back to what you were talking about.
oh, but I feel like that's really important though. And again, like i- if a school just does meta majors and program maps and doesn't kind of leverage the potentials there, then I don't know if you could really have the kind of like transformative potential. But it feels to me like what you described is a great way to get faculty on board with why guided pathways, because learning communities programs, some of them took a programmatic approach, but a lot of times they're boutique-y.
Mm.
And this is a way to make them not boutique. This is a way to use learning communities and interdisciplinary, full-on interdisciplinary learning communities to really solve institutional problems, especially around math.
I'm
So
really excited to get faculty together to talk about how they can work together and design courses together. That's just so exciting to me.
me too. Are you talking about at the ATL conference?
Anywhere.
Anywhere,
Pick a place, Jen.
anywhere, yes.
Anywhere
So
anyone's interested. I just the potential for getting people together to break down some of the silos and really work together is just I'm super excited.
me too. And I know you can't come to the to the ATL retreat because it's the same time as the WAC conference.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay, but just a little plug for the ATL retreat, which is in March, and the ATL conference, which is in the spring. All right. Thanks, Alyssa. Okay, and everyone else, feel free to weigh in. So another thing about the knowledge transmission approach and also the cafeteria model, the status quo model, is that a lot of times students do have these underlying challenges that make it difficult for them to absorb and apply the facts they hear or read. And I talked about this during webinar number 2 with metacognitive skills, like this is how you read a text, and here's how you read a text in this discipline. So for example, if I were teaching Shakespeare again, I would never just say, oh, I expect that you know how to read Shakespeare. I would teach you how to read Shakespeare in the Shakespeare class. So again, like the metacognitive skills of reading within a particular discipline, what does it look like to read in the sciences? What does it look like to write in the sciences? What does it look like to use evidence in the sciences? These are, and then also like how much time should you be spending at home, on your own time doing homework, and how do you actually do the homework? So really metacognitive skills are very important. And a lot of times, if a student is not motivated and a student has lesser developed metacognitive skills based on previous educational experiences, a lot of times faculty dismiss those as non-academic problems, and it's not, these are better addressed by other people. And that's really, Guided Pathways is really taking this on. So again, a lot of times people feel like motivation is not their responsibility and that students need to come to their classes magically motivated, even though nothing these students have experienced has taught them or encouraged motivation. And so again, like if you think about this in an online class, if it's just like a bunch of content, no matter how engagingly the content and facts are presented, it's not very motivational for students. So it's really shifting in Guided Pathways the responsibility of motivation back on to faculty and instructors. But the problem with the current model is that it's not something that an individual faculty member can do, no matter how well they're teaching alone in their own class. It's really something that could be better fostered with this programmatic approach. So for example, I know a lot of faculty work really hard in a face-to-face class or in their online class to encourage motivation, like to make students fall in love with their discipline. But it is a lot of effort if you're doing it all by yourself. But if you think about the difference between, okay, I'm teaching the introductory level course and I know the students are going to get these other skills later, so I can spend more time building their motivation and helping them fall in love with this rather than just giving them a huge amount of content and hoping that that motivates them. And again, if you don't see yourself as responsible for teaching reading in your discipline, writing in your discipline, um, studying in your discipline, all of the different things that we know make students successful, then a lot of times there is a tendency to hold students responsible for their lack of metacognitive skills. And the example that they give in the book is that they were talking to an instructor at a 2-year college, and the faculty member said something like, so the student came to me during week 7 and said, I've missed, like X amount of class and I haven't turned in any assignments, and what can I do to get caught up? And the instructor was really upset with the student. And in the Guided Pathways model, that scenario theoretically doesn't happen, because you have people who are charged with keeping the student on the path, and that could be the advisors, that could be the faculty teaching within the program. So like you are really tracking the students and you're identifying these things early on, so that and really making sure that the students are learning how to study and read and do the assignments so that these situations don't happen. So again, it's just holding the college more responsible for metacognitive skills, or holding all of us responsible rather than blaming it on individual students. So I want to stop here for a moment and I want to say, given the information just presented, how do you understand the larger curricular and pedagogical redesign of guided pathways in terms of online courses? And I think what I'm interested in knowing is if your thinking has changed, and what does this phrase leverage technology wisely mean to you in the context of fostering or not fostering student motivation? And again, I know that's kind of a big, those are two really big questions. So I'll just wait for a moment. And again, if people could type into the chat, or if people want to speak, that would be awesome. Whoops. And no worries if the, you know, if this is too, I guess maybe if people even just want to type comments into the chat or things that they're thinking about. So Shanna said, what I think I'm seeing is that online courses can't just be in isolation. They need to be connected to the bigger program and purpose. Yes, absolutely. 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 Yes, yes, yes. Online courses that basically online courses show us a lot of ways in which the status quo focus on course enrollment is not working. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Thank you. And Alyssa said, again, I'd say alignment and then add balance. Technology can engage and motivate, but it can also discourage. Alyssa, that's beautiful. And also, I feel like that last sentence really encapsulates leveraging technology wisely, you know? Do you have anything else you want to add?
Mm, I don't know. I guess I would just add to look at the technology choices through an equity lens, like we've
Mm,
been talking about, because certain technologies, I mean, if they are chosen wisely and aligned with the activities and become an enhancement to what you're teaching, I mean, that can really level the playing field for people. But if it's done haphazardly or it's done, I don't know, I guess haphazard is maybe too strong of a word, but just like without connecting all of the dots, I mean, it could get discouraging to students if they have like a billion logins and they don't know why they're doing certain activities in certain systems. I mean, even sometimes just getting quality Wi-Fi is hard. So,
mm,
I mean, I know you probably shouldn't be taking an online class if you don't have access to Wi-Fi, but you know, online offers that flexibility in hours and attendance that students often need. So again, there's a balance there that the technologies we're using can either enhance or discourage.
mm. Yeah, and I guess I I want to kind of skip ahead to a slide just based on what you just said about equity. Um, actually, this will be perfect.
That was totally unplanned.
Well, thank you. Thank you so
I
much. I
didn't look
really
ahead.
appreciate it.
I did not look ahead in the slides, I promise.
So thinking about equity, like just keeping that in mind and thinking about how guided pathways is different than what we're doing now. So again, colleges are convening faculty and professional student services staff to define skills, concepts, and habits of mind essential to each course. And right away, that is an equity move in the sense of it provides an opportunity. It's an equity move if the program outcomes, these skills, concepts, and habits of mind, are making these shifts around. We're doing this to avoid curricular incoherence, which we know affects historically underserved students more than are the students that who have traditionally succeeded. And also that you're really thinking about concepts rather than this course content dump, right? Second, colleges can draw on the expertise of professional staff to help support instructional redesign. And here's where I think that, like, from an equity lens, from an equity perspective, your diversity of equity, like a lot of schools have chief officers of equity and diversity who I think should really be engaged in supporting these instructional redesigns, because what equity looks like in an online class can go everywhere from like, I know I took a course a couple years ago on redesigning online courses specifically to serve historically underserved males. And what they've found is that if you redesign the course for that population, all students do better. And then if colleges are creating and sustaining peer-based faculty professional development structures, Alyssa, just this is what made me, when you were talking about like all the different ways that a course that online courses in the context of a program could be made more equitable, you could do nothing but just look at what are our online courses doing in the name of equity. Like, just the way that you just talked about it made me think, oh yes, and those would be great ways like to constantly think about faculty professional development. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Um, Diane said, Diane Smith, thank you for contributing. I'm so grateful. Diane wrote, since my college is talking about adding more online courses, all of this really helps me understand that we aren't looking at doing that from a good perspective. Diane, thank you so much. I think it's tempting to just say, oh, we need to add more online courses for access. And it may be that your college does, yet it must be also you're offering them in the name of ensuring student learning to ensure program completion. So yeah, so Diane, thanks for offering that. And of course, if you want to say anything or type more, please absolutely do so. Angela wrote, I think that sustaining peer-based faculty development will help ensure alignment within a GP model among individual courses as part of a whole. And Angela, I love this. And the peer-based faculty development to ensure alignment, like, this could be a whole thing, right? Like, let's just say you had faculty learning communities that were composed of people who were teaching courses in a program, right? Like, so the college has designed these default program maps and all the faculty are getting together to think about what does alignment look like at the course level in our program. Yeah, you said exactly. Yay! Yeah, it's really exciting when it starts to kind of all click together. Um, like I think sometimes for me, a lot of the guided pathway stuff was just words until I started doing this webinar series, and then I'm like, oh, now I really understand what's happening like behind the words, and then you realize how powerful the words are. So, Alyssa, go ahead and share what you wrote in the chat, please.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, I just said that the technology is only as good as whatever activity or course or assessment or program or whatever it is that it's meant to be used for. So if that
Mhm.
activity or course or assessment or program is poorly designed, it doesn't really matter which technology is chosen
Mhm.
because there's not going to be alignment there. And I just said hashtag intentional design.
Mm.
So choose wisely.
Yeah, and again, it's very interesting to think about alignment in the sense of how is my course teaching to these program level outcomes? And then alignment in the sense of, are my outcomes matching with my instructional methods, matching with my assessments, matching with my technology?
Right?
Yeah, and so you really do start to see the need for deep inquiry collaboratively from interdisciplinary faculty.
And I actually added a best practice indicator in case you didn't see it to the checklist relating to course outcomes and module level outcomes aligning to program outcomes
That is awesome.
to help support this work. So,
Yay, that's
yeah.
awesome. I'm so glad. So I do have these questions, and I just think, like these are a little bit more rhetorical, but again, how could online instruction look different if instructors were collaboratively creating program level skills, concepts, and habits of mind that informed course design? So right away, what might happen to online instruction? And then how might online instruction look different if professional staff from all areas is part of the instructional redesign of online courses? And of course, face-to-face courses too. I mean, it really is a very different approach to teaching that is not just, it's not as faculty centric as our previous models. And there's a really great quote in chapter 3 that I have yet to put on any slide deck, where a faculty member talks about how like a burden was lifted from her shoulders when she realized that she didn't have to be the be all end all. And then third, colleges should create and sustain peer-based professional development structures. So again, what does that look like for online courses if faculty development is really the work of assessment of student learning? So knowing that knowing that you're going to have a lot more evidence of student learning with really clear outcomes, then you can start to really dig deep into like what's working and what's not working. And again, it's not just you, you're doing it in collaboration with other faculty. So I kind of wanted to unpack this quote: technology is recognized as a valuable tool for learning, but it's leveraged as part of a larger pedagogical toolkit and approach. And I, I, I did this thing where I remixed and slightly reworded the quote about the college recognizes technology as a valuable tool for learning, and it leverages technology. And the reason you do that is to support inductive teaching methods and provide students with personalized feedback. And I'm not going to cover personalized feedback because we are not going to have time. But I did want to talk about inductive teaching because I think it's really interesting, especially if you're thinking about moving away from a content-based approach. Because if you have a ton of content, it's very difficult to do inductive teaching. And I see somebody posted in the chat. Oh, Angela said, I need to leave to pick up my daughter. Oh, tell her hi. And I really love this series. Thank you. And Angela, thank you. Thanks for attending. I really appreciate you. And family is so important. So I think that's really beautiful. I love it. All right, so let's go back. I'm just going to close out the chat. Okay, so inductive teaching techniques pose an interesting problem or question, and it helps students with the particular issues or barriers they encounter while trying to solve it. And I wanted to stop there for a moment and just unpack some of this. So posing an interesting problem or question. So Alyssa, based on what you were talking about with math earlier, Carly McAvoy at South Puget Sound, as part of, like, I think it was a precursor to their guided pathways work, but it became integrated into their guided pathways work. She did a ton, she created for, what I can't remember the number of the math course that's not, it's non-STEM, it's for people in liberal arts and stuff. And it's like, I think it's called Exploring Math or Math Exploration. I can't, so sorry. I used to know all this off the top of my head, but she basically created all of these contextualized math problems that were interesting so that faculty could be teaching math that would show students a discipline-specific way to look at math. And and again, like posing interesting problems or questions in the context of your discipline, and then helping students while they're trying to solve it. So it's not just posing a problem and then like walking away. It's listening to students and thinking about like, what does this tell me about a student's mental model? What does this tell me about information or assumptions that a student is bringing to this that's leading them down the wrong path or getting them to the right answer? And I think in most fields, like especially in the liberal arts, the adaptive challenges, like a technical problem, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, is a technical problem means that there is a best practice. There is, you can bring in an expert and help you solve it. But an adaptive challenge means that you have to basically create new learning because for a lot of different reasons, because the problem is adaptive. So posing adaptive challenges to students in your course is another really interesting way to do this. And if you're teaching a whole bunch of content, there isn't time to do this. I also wanted to give a shout out to there's a really fabulous chemistry instructor at North who was part of the Big Ideas project. And she was doing this in her chemistry courses, where she would give the students interesting problems or questions, and then the students would work in small groups, and she would walk around and listen and think about and help them think about their thinking. And again, it was really a great way to prepare students for readiness in the major, but taking a very different approach than just the content knowledge transmission. So using technology to support inductive teaching, the guided pathways twist is to use technology to overcome logistical barriers inherent in the process. And this is where I think there's sort of a disconnect in the way that the authors talked about the problem that Guided Pathways is trying to solve with fully online courses. And the way that they talk about using technology to overcome logistical barriers is very course-centric. So really quickly, they talk about one example of an inductive teaching move is questioning. So you ask students a question, you give them time to formulate an answer, and then you address the misconceptions those answers reveal. And the example they gave was clicker technology in a lecture course. And so they basically talked about how before clickers, like instructors might be giving a lecture and then they might pause and ask for questions, much as I'm doing in this webinar series, but then asking the students to, like using those answers to explain to the students thinking. And again, like really unpacking whatever the clicker information is. But if you just use the clicker information, if you just get the clicker information and you just kind of present it back to the students, but you don't explain to them what it means, you don't use that information to be truly formative, then research shows that you may as well not have used the clicker technology. And again, done this so much in my face-to-face classes, doing it now in this webinar series where I'm just basically like asking questions and then but I guess there's so many important ways to do this kind of work, and it's too much to ask individual faculty to do it on their own. And that's why they've set up this iterative process of these faculty inquiry groups so that you're not designing your course by yourself. That burden is not fully on your shoulders. Like you have your e-learning faculty, you have your DEI folks, there's just a lot more collective attention to what's happening in the student experience, because to be honest, to do all of this by yourself is really overwhelming and it's a recipe for burnout. So it's really about making small continuous improvements over time, but resetting up our institutions to be structured for that. And then they also give the example of hybrid courses. So giving students an intriguing problem, formulating questions using online materials, and then class time can be devoted to activities that help address these questions and further build students' abilities to solve the problem. But again, like that's pretty much how they talk about inductive teaching. And what I think is more interesting is, what does inductive teaching look like in a fully online class? And I just think and how might a guided pathways model create more space for inductive teaching? Because right now, the way that the way that our institutions are set up, it's really difficult to do this. So I'm going to stop talking for a second, and I'm just going to say that, Alyssa, I think that this might be a really great way to talk now about the Washington course design checklist, and how might what are you thinking in terms of how the Washington course design checklist could be a good tool for colleges as they're thinking about this shift in guided pathways with online classes?
Well, first I was going to answer the question that you posed of
Oh, good.
what does inductive teaching, what could that look like in an online or blended course? I was typing, but I'm a terrible typist and I can never type as quickly as you ask questions, so I'm halfway typing. So I'll just tell you all instead of posting it. I was just thinking that inductive teaching is an opportunity to make online discussions more engaging by changing how you frame questions, like change the type of question that you're asking and give students space to think about those things and come back with, I don't know, I mean, just making it more interesting for them. And I'm trying to think of a specific example, but rather than just asking students to do like a normal, what is your definition of this, or what are the 5 principles of that, but actually giving some sort of a question that is interesting, that poses an interesting problem, and let students work through that, either in group discussions or all together as a class, with the teacher coming in and participating as needed to pull out more information from the students, or to redirect them if needed, or to point to more resources.
I
So
love that.
I don't know, that's just my first thought on inductive teaching, where I would like go, oh, I could easily put this to work in an online discussion. So
Can I jump off that for a minute?
sure, and then we can come back to the checklist in a minute.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say really quickly, I hadn't thought about this before, but you're absolutely right. Because I think the way that you describe sort of the traditional, like, okay, now tell me the top three, you know, habits of mind from X, like it's a lower level Bloom
Yeah,
taxonomy.
yeah,
But if you're posing an interesting problem or a question, then it becomes more synthesis.
yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not very articulate sometimes. I get so jumbled up
You're
in my
very
head about
articulate.
what I'm trying to say. It doesn't always come out right.
You said it beautifully. You said, seriously, you did. I just got excited about, like, oh yeah, I just know you did great.
Yeah. So I guess an example would be like having students do a role play, and either assigning them a role or asking them to take on a role of somebody to explore different perspectives, so that could give an equity lens to the class, and also make it more interesting and inviting for students to want to participate, because they're getting multiple perspectives on things while they're learning the content. To build in reflection pieces too there. I was in a webinar earlier in the week, and it was called Discussion on the Rocks, and it talked about putting twists on discussions, and that's kind of what made me think of this in relation to the inductive teaching.
I love that. On the
So
rocks.
yeah, it was really cool presentation. They did drinks, and they made all their own little swirls, and they took their own Creative Commons pictures and posted them in their presentation. So it was pretty neat.
That's
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
fun.
So do you want me to talk about the checklist now, or do you want people to talk about the inductive teaching?
I would love you to talk about the checklist, and I'm going to go back in the chat and call it up from the
Oh,
link
okay.
while you
Yeah.
are talking about it.
Okay. And I am going to delete what I was typing so that I don't accidentally press enter and post a garble of things. Okay. So how much time do you want me to spend on this?
Um, I have finished my content, so
Okay.
I would love it if you, yeah, so you can just bring us home.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I don't want to take up too much time because people might have questions related to the technology pieces and inductive teaching. But what Jennifer's been talking about, the work that I've been doing, we're calling it the Washington Course Design Checklist. And it's basically a tool for faculty to help them, like I said earlier, make teaching more efficient, remove barriers to learning for students. There will be places in the checklist built in where you could maybe earn a badge for achieving a certain level of something in your course. You may have already done some of this work, so it's a great way to get recognition for fabulous work you've already done. Um, I'm going to let you all go to the link and read through the introduction pieces and everything on your own. I'm happy to answer questions for you about this, but I want to skip down into some of the standards. I will say that the checklist is organized into 4 content areas or 4 sections. They are course design, outcomes and objectives, assessment and feedback, and then materials and tools. And what this checklist does is it works together many of the pieces of the work that's going on across our system. So there's OER pieces, there's low cost materials pieces, there's accessibility pieces to this, there's guided pathways pieces built in, there's student engagement built into this, there's alignment of assessment and content. Standard 4.7 is about selecting your technology wisely. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about in just basic instructional practices are already built into this. Jen, if you will just scroll down.
Absolutely.
Um, this next page is the table of contents. We're not going to stop there.
Okay.
If you will go down to 1.4.
Yeah.
Okay, so standard 1.4 in the course design section says course design cultivates a sense of belonging. Jen
Mm,
really helped me craft this. I bounced a lot of ideas off of her. This particular standard has been through several revisions, and I finally feel like it's to a place where it makes sense.
mm,
But here's a way that this ties in with guided pathways, where if you're building some of these things in at the course level in your instructional pathways, you are helping to keep your students on a path. You're welcoming them into your classroom. You're building in places for students who want to express things about themselves and connect content to their personal lives, their professional lives, whatever it is. You're just building in places for that. So I'd encourage you to go in and look at standard 1.4. I do think that that one crosses over nicely with some of the guided pathways pieces. Jen, if you will go down to, let's see, 1.5
mm,
is a course design engages students. So that's talking about, again, creating that sense of community and bringing students into the fold, getting them engaged, exciting them, motivating them is another way we could talk about this standard.
mm,
If you go down to, let's see, where do we want to go next, Jen? Section 2 has to do with aligning outcomes and objectives,
mm.
and I can't remember exactly which one where I added it, but align. Oh, there it is under exemplary on 2.1. Course level outcomes align with program level outcomes. So there's another guided pathways piece built
Nice.
into this.
Nice.
And let's see. Um, Assessment and feedback, talking about aligning assessments to the module level objectives and it clearly explaining the purpose of assessments to students.
Mm,
This particular section aligns nicely with the transparency in learning and teaching
yeah.
work that's being done, TILT, if you've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's universal design for learning is built in here. If you keep going down to section 4, there's a whole standard on accessibility
Mm,
I think it's 4.4. Course content is designed using best practices for accessible course design.
yeah.
And then just to really wrap us up and bring us home, if you go down to 4.7, and I didn't hit on all of these, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions anybody has, but 4.7 is course technologies are aligned with course learning activities, assessments, course level outcomes, and module level objectives. So
Nice.
that gets at selecting those technologies wisely.
That's great. And Alyssa, you may have already said this. I think you did, but I just want to reinstate that, like the quality matters. Like I think you and I have had lots of conversations about what we love about quality matters and what we wish was better. And I feel like you've done a really great job of using that as a foundation to just create this whole new tool that is so powerful and
Yeah.
really built for us
Oh,
in
thank you.
Washington.
I should mention that a lot of the work that's in here aligns with principles you'll find in the QM rubric. So this is not meant as a replacement for the QM rubric, but if you've already put your class through that type of a course review, chances are you also meet a majority of the standards on the Washington course design checklist. But where our work varies from the QM
Yeah.
rubric is that it is specific to Washington. It was built for Washington by Washington. We've had input from students, from faculty,
Mm,
from instructional designers. If anybody else wants to give input on it, let me know. We are on version 3. So this is our release version. This is what's going to go out as like our version for now. And we've been trying to be very transparent about the design process. So if you haven't heard about it till this point, my apologies. We have tried to reach as many people as possible. I will be presenting about this at the Washington Canvas conference at the end of March. And like Jen mentioned, I won't be at the ATL retreat because I'll be at the other conference. But we've been really trying to be intentional in what we're doing and intentionally aligning it to other work that's going on throughout the system. So I don't know, it's just an interesting, I think, way to look at building a course. And I
yeah.
guess for me, how this crosses over with guided pathways too is I know we're trying to get away from course-centric lenses of looking at course design, but if we don't look at that quality in course design at the individual course, it doesn't matter if it's laid out in a program. If it's not a quality course, and I mean, the students still aren't going to have the experience they need. So we do need to get away from my class, my students, but we also still need to look at the quality of that individual classroom to make sure that the elements of student success are there.
100%.
So
And I think, Alyssa, the other thing I'm thinking about as you said that is, like when you think about traditional e-learning with the course-centric model, it becomes, kind of an option for an instructor to do this work. But if we are really thinking about best practices and closing equity gaps and thinking about program completion, a tool like this becomes something for all faculty to use within a program so that students are getting consistent experiences. Does that make sense?
yeah, I actually had a question earlier because I am the system lead quality matters coordinator for all 34 of our colleges. And a lot of times I hear back from faculty about academic freedom,
Mm,
like pushback on that. I wondered how guided pathways might butt heads with academic freedom. Have you heard anything from people, who are just getting started on working on guided pathways if they feel like they're losing their freedom for designing their own individual courses? I kind of have a thought on it. I just wanted to know if that's even something that's come up. I don't want to sow a seed that isn't out there
yeah,
already.
I think it's definitely come up, and I
Okay.
think this is where it's really, really important that an institution has a very clear definition about what academic freedom is
Okay.
and what it isn't.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like,
I agree.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
because I don't,
figured you did. Yeah.
yeah, well, because I don't personally feel that the checklist or quality matters impinges on academic freedom. I could see how it could be interpreted that way, but I personally don't agree with that, because what I see the guided pathways work is as a way to align all those important things and what the students are supposed to be learning so that they come out of each class they take, regardless of who taught it and whether it was taken face to face or online. They're still all coming out of that same 101 class or 102 or 203 or whatever it is. They're all coming out with the same skills that they need.
Mm.
And then I don't think that it has to be delivered exactly the same in each classroom. But
Oh gosh,
student,
no.
that's where I'm getting at is
Yeah.
I don't think that a classroom has to look identical to another classroom to be fitting in the guided pathways model.
No.
I think it needs to teach to the same things and strive for the same goals and the same alignment to program outcomes. But I think that it doesn't impinge on the academic freedom of the faculty because they get to choose how they present the material to the students. Is
Yes.
that a correct interpretation?
I think yes, I think it is a correct interpretation. And I think another layer to this is that ideally the faculty are working together to create these program level outcomes and these course level outcomes in the context of them. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so I think the other larger issue around academic freedom that I think is something that guided pathways is going to have to tackle. And I'm actually hoping that one of the keynote presenters for the ATL conference is W. Tully Hairston. And this showed up at Evergreen, like when Evergreen was they from a number of sources they received student feedback that assessment and the quality of student learning was not equitable. Like students were not having equitable learning experiences at Evergreen. And then there was that whole conflagration around academic freedom. And I think there's a really interesting tension between accountability when there is disproportionate impact on a student, especially on historically underserved populations, and then this notion of academic freedom. So I think it's very, very, very contextualized. And so I wouldn't want to just say, like, I wouldn't want to make blanket statements about academic freedom, like with guided pathways. I think I would want to know very specifically where someone felt like their academic freedom was being impinged on, not as a phantom threat, but like, here is a very specific example of where I feel like my academic freedom is being impinged on, and then look at that. Does that make sense? Because I think anything that like a lot of faculty go into these jobs because they thrive on autonomy, and I am definitely someone who thrives on autonomy. So I think when we think about the way that like sometimes I feel like whew, uh, I'm not quite sure how to say this, but when we feel like our autonomy might be threatened, we can sometimes go straight to, is this an impingement or a violation of academic freedom? So I just think for any college, I would just want to be really clear about what exactly are we talking about? Like, where are the specific places where we're worried about this, not the phantom threat of it. Does
Yeah,
that make
I
sense?
agree. Yeah. And I'm sorry to bring up a topic that is so sensitive. It was just something that was on my mind. And just going back to the checklist as, another framework or lens to look at how a course could be designed, all of the things that are in there are designed to make the course better for everyone.
Yeah.
It does hit some of the target populations where we want to encourage more engagement or build things in, but it is in line with universal design. You help one, you help the many.
Mm,
So all those pieces are built in, and just trying to remove barriers to success for everyone.
I love that, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Seriously, I really do. And I guess too, like I just want to also affirm that guided pathways will fail if we shy away from sensitive topics. Like these are these are long held issues, and guided pathways is a, like if we're not airing the adaptive challenge of what is academic freedom and what is it not, and like what is our collective responsibility to historically underserved populations and to transforming our institutions. But if we never have that conversation, then we'll just make superficial changes, and this will be just yet another initiative that doesn't really do anything.
Yeah. And I will apologize also for I'm a novice to most of this, so if I've phrased something incorrectly, I do apologize.
Are you
I'm
kidding?
still learning.
You've been great. I feel like I'm still learning, and so I feel like some nights after this webinar series, I've woken up in the middle of the night and I'm like, have I just gone completely off the rails? Like,
Yeah, I get that feeling. Yeah,
I
and
think
just
we
for
all feel like that.
yeah, and for everyone in the audience, Jen and I have a history of making mistakes together, so we're good at that.
We are so good at making mistakes together. So Diane said she had to run and do a class observation, and she said, thanks for your work on this series. It's been very helpful. Diane, thank you to you for attending. And Alyssa, I really appreciate your help with these webinars.
Oh, you're most
And
welcome.
yeah, you've been really, really wonderful. And I see we still have Lisa and Shanna, Shana Friend from Highline. Any final thoughts? I really appreciate you sticking to the end. And Alyssa, really beautiful work on the course design checklist.
Thank you. It's gotten really great reception. I've been really surprised. Every time I go to the link, there are people, I can see that there are other
Yeah,
people in there. I mean, like if you look now,
I see it.
I mean, I'm in there, but there's always other people, always. Every time I go to look at the document, there's always people in there. So that's encouraging.
That is awesome. That's
I hope the
awesome.
same happens with your slide decks
It does actually. It's
and your
interesting.
recordings.
And my record, not so much the recordings, but definitely the
Oh,
slide decks. Yeah, and yeah. So I think I'll stop recording, and thanks to those who are listening. And